respect to its constitutional mandate to conduct vetting of the nominated PSs for an indefinite period. Meanwhile, the trial of 12 police officers accused in the murder of baby Samantha Pendo has been pushed to the 30th of January 2023 after Mohamed Ba failed to turn up for plea taking. Justice Kanyi Kimondo directed the Inspector General of Police to arrest Officer Ba for failing to appear in court as required. The officers have also been ordered to undergo a mental checkup at the Mathare Mental Hospital to determine if they are fit to stand trial. The 11 officers, Titus Yoma, Titus Mitune, John Chengo, Benjamin Koima, Benjamin Lorema, Volker Edabo, Cyprien Robe Wakio, Josephat Sensira, James Rono, Lina Kogei and Mohamed Ali Guyo have been released on 200,000 shillings bond.
They will be released upon execution.
And on the Wajir gubernatorial petition hearing, witnesses took to the stand to testify on the alleged electoral malpractices that compromised the integrity of the governor election during the August 9 polls that saw Ahmed Abdullahi declared as winner. Maash Mohamed, a Jubilee agent at Cotton Polling Center, told the court that voting at the center started at 11:30 a.m. and the electorates were promised to be compensated for the delayed time, only for the center to be closed at 5:30 p.m. Marsh said that the presiding officer at the station went out and brought the Kenya Defense officers who ordered all the voters out of Cotton Primary School compound, and upon protesting, the voters who were waiting on the queue were forcefully evicted from the premises. The agent who produced a list of voters who failed to vote on the said date told the court that the election was marred with violence and intimidation, with over 150 people chased away without voting. Ruth Sarmoy, NTV.
When the officers who have all along
Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua yesterday held a meeting aimed at finding lasting solutions to the ongoing drought ravaging many parts of the country. Gachagua led more than 100 dignitaries to launch the Drought Flash Appeal, saying other similar and continuous exchange of ideas will result in a united approach towards addressing the drought. Gachagua also took a moment in Lagdera, Garissa County, to hit back at Azimio la Umoja One Kenya leader Raila Odinga, telling him the Kenya Kwanza government cannot take advice from him. The DP was reacting to Odinga's statement where he accused Ruto of being a, quote, puppet of the West and promoting foreign biotechnology. Take a listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, our development partners, His Excellency President William Ruto made a deliberate promise that no Kenyan shall die from ravages of drought. He has tasked me to spearhead the drought mitigation efforts across the Republic by instituting measures to protect affected livelihoods and sectors.
My people have been impoverished by this kind of rains. Drought, insecurity, a double tragedy. Your Excellency, this county, 90% of the times, 90% of the county, sub-county or the constituency, get water through water tracking. And you know water tracking is not sustainable. Your Excellency, I urge you, the mega dams the government is going to build, ile ambazo zitajengwa hapa lazima ama tunaomba tupatie mbili at least.
Nimeona ule kiongozi wa upinzani akipiga makelele ya kwamba William Ruto ati anashikiliana na wazungu kutoka West, ati amekuwa kibaraka. Ningetaka kukuambia wewe mzee uelewi maneno. Kenya imesonga mbele. Kenya hii imesonga mbele, umepitwa na wakati. Rais William Ruto anashauriana na hao wazungu, atashauriana na wa China, na wa Russia, na wa Arabu, na wa Afrika, atashauriana na kuwa na mpango na yeyote katika duniani hii ambaye anatakia Kenya mema. Nyinyi mko na shida na hii wazungu wakitusaidia? Mko na shida? Na ile mzee anabweka, shida yake ni gani? Sisi hatutaki ushauri wake. Kwa sababu ile ushauri alitoa ndio iliweka Kenya kwa shimo. alimshauri rais aliondoka akaweka Kenya katika deni ya 10 trillion.
Police Constable Anne Wanjiku Waigwa, based at Wilson Airport Police Station, is the recent luckiest officer in town after being awarded a full education scholarship from the International Leadership University based in Hurlingham. Speaking at the graduation ceremony held at the university grounds, Vice Chancellor Timothy Kiruki said Waigwa was rewarded for her honesty when she returned 2.4 million shillings left behind by a tourist from the United Kingdom who had left the money at a security checkpoint at Wilson Airport. The university management has urged its graduates to borrow a leaf from the officer. The officer is set to start her psychology studies in January.
In this year, we have recognized a policewoman because, again, in the image of many Kenyans, the police are not to be trusted. They're not people of integrity, but there are some. And we want to encourage those who are people of integrity to persevere.
She therefore receives an award that is exemplary, an award that is going to be most transformative, an award that leaves her with a lot of joy in heart as opposed to the blame that she would have in her own self.
Because our emphasis is to develop leaders of integrity, leaders that will experience transformation in themselves and then step out to seek to transform out communities.
This task of developing leaders of integrity, men and women who will step up and bring about transformation in our churches, as well as both the private and public sectors, requires that we all put our attention on the development of our infrastructure.
You've been given a unique training based on enduring biblical values. Therefore, go and make a difference in all you do. Let your light keep on shining, empowered by the Holy Spirit, for the Lord has promised us never to leave us nor to forsake us.
On to a report that informs in part our conversation today on demystifying GMOs. The food situation that the country currently finds itself in is partly informed by the Russia-Ukraine war, which has impacted the supply of wheat as well as fertilizer. Now, a group of Ukrainian activists who are currently in the country have urged the Kenyan government to stand with their country, Ukraine, in the ongoing invasion by Russia. The activists say that the ongoing war has ravaged Ukraine's infrastructure and communication systems, bringing the economy to a halt. The activists have vowed to each country in Africa to drive them, have appealed to the countries in Africa.
The reason for this war is that Russia would like to crush Ukraine. So we are fighting for freedom, for territorial integrity, and I believe you in Kenya, we are fighting against colonial empire, and I believe in Kenya, you can easily understand what we are fighting.
All attempts of Russia to increase divisions in Ukrainian society on level of religion or level of ethnicity was false.
We understand that business is not only about money. Now business is also about humanity, and people's life is the biggest value.
Unfortunately, on this occasion, we're trying to explain how deeply it was rooted and why it is so extremely important to stop Russia from committing genocide in Ukraine, because Russia has been doing these war crimes before, and Russia will continue, if not stop today for good.
All right, let's quickly take a look at the news diary as we get into our conversation on GMOs and MPs to plan planned acquisition, of Spire Bank. MPs to discuss the Strategic Food Reserve Trust Fund. MPs to probe Uhuru's government expenditure of 55 billion shillings. 68 MPs sign impeachment motion against Governor Roseline Obala. World Cup enters day 3 in Qatar. Roseline, these 68 against which governor? Meru Governor. All right, there we have the news diary. Let's now get into our conversation. And who do I have with me in studio this morning? There's one still missing, but one of my experts is still on his way. Let's take a look at who has made it into studio this far. And we have Professor Francis Amula. Good morning.
Good morning.
He is from the Department of Biochemistry, University of Nairobi. Sitting next to him, this time from Kenyatta University, we have Professor Richard Odwor, Department of Biochemistry, Microbiology and Biotechnology. Karibu sana. Welcome to NTV. And we are also joined by another professor who, like Professor Mullah, is from the University of Nairobi. He's a plant virologist, and this is Professor Douglas Miano. Karibu sana. The earliest riser of all of us. I think you got here even before myself.
Thank you.
Good to see you. We're waiting for Dr. Sylvester Anami, who is Senior Research Fellow, Institute of Bioresearch, JQAT. I invited you to send your questions using the WhatsApp number 0701963000 or hashtag AMLiveNTV on Twitter. So we'll be looking at some of your questions, but this GMO question has dominated newspaper coverage this morning as well. If you look at your Daily Nation, page 2 to 3, we have a GMO question. Ruto and Raila stance on issue over the years. Unlike Odinga, who has changed positions, the president has remained consistent. This is David Mwere. There's a quote here from Raila Odinga. The GMO food currently available on the international market have passed risk assessment and are not likely to present this for human health. So I believe that is a quote from Raila previously. In 2011, Raila said the GMO science had passed the risk assessment and therefore not likely to harm people. His stance has since changed. A couple of questions raised here on page 3. Now, this is what my panelists will be getting into, and this is by Masi Chelangat. Several questions. First of all, what is GMO and GM foods? Are GM foods safe? I'm sure these are the same questions that have plagued my viewers. So we'll be getting answers to some of these questions from my expert panel this morning. And I see at a glance countries that have banned genetically modified organisms on Sunday. Mr. Raila Odinga noted that many countries in the European Union, such as France, Germany, Austria, Greece, Hungary, Netherlands, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Bulgaria, Poland, Denmark, Malta, Slovenia, Italy, and Croatia have banned GMOs in Africa. Mr. Odinga mentioned Algeria and Madagascar, and in Asia, Turkey, as well as Saudi Arabia, among those that have disallowed GMOs, as well as Belize, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, and the Americas. Now, the Business Daily also gets into the question of GMOs. I can see on page 5 here, MPs debate GMO maize imports today. This report by Edwin Mutai. Parliament will this afternoon hear a petition seeking to stop the planned importation of 10 million bags of GMO maize in efforts to protect farmers' earnings. That will set the stage for further inflation. I beg your pardon, let me just clarify what that is. That will set the stage for further inflation rally. This report by Kevin Mutai. The Taifa Leo has made the debate around GMOs its front page story. We have, here it is, GMO Kifo au Ohai. The full report on page 2 of Taifa Leo. They here have listed the manufaa benefits of GMO, na madhara ya GMO. So you can grab your copy of the Taifa Leo to take a look at that. And I will leave these dailies from the Nation Center, where I am currently situated, and take a look at what the Standard has. The Standard actually, like the Taifa Leo, has gone big with the question of GMOs. The maize rebellion is the headline they're carrying. MPs from the Rift are up in arms over government intention to import maize, saying move will hurt their constituents who are harvesting their crop at the moment. Clergy demands apology from Trade CS over GMO remarks. I can see quotes here from Moses Kuria saying the government of Kenya will not buy maize directly or indirectly other than for strategic reserve. The Gazette notice we will release today will open up the market to millers and anyone to import maize duty-free for 6 months. Anthony Muheria here says Kenyans deserve an apology. We shouldn't trivialize serious matters like GMOs. Food security and farming. The lives of people are at stake. This issue of GMOs is a discussion that deserves deep and fair engagement with scientists. I have said scientists in studio. Julius Ruto says, I am against any move to import produce when local harvests have not been exhausted, and in case of need to import, the ministry should make recommendations through the National Assembly. David Kosing, farmers are harvesting and they were expecting that the minister would have said, take your maize to NCPB. Who is Moses Kuria representing? He might be representing some businessmen out there. All right, I will leave the dailies there and engage the scientists that have been referenced repeatedly in this report. I will start, let me start with you, Professor Miano. There was that question posed on page 3 of the Daily Nation. What is GMO and GM foods? Is there a distinction? Is it the same thing? Do enlighten us.
Yeah, thank you, Olive, and thank you, listeners. So what is GMO and what is GM foods? GMO refers to any organism that is changed in a way that it could not have occurred naturally. That means that the genetic makeup has been changed in a way where mating or crossing could not have occurred. So that means a piece of the gene was transferred from another organism and put into that another organism where naturally that could not happen. So an organism can be any living organism. It can be a bacteria, it can be a fungi, it can be an animal, it can be a plant. When you come to talk about GM foods, then you refer to what is being grown for commercially to be consumed by people. So you can have a GM organism that is not food. For example, when you talk about bacteria producing penicillin, that's not necessarily for food, but it's for medicine. But when you modify maize or you modify cassava or a crop for the purposes of improving it for consumption, that's when we talk about GM food. So I think that's a difference. So there can be GM organisms for different purposes, even industrial, producing enzymes that we may need to in our industries. It can be, you can modify an organism so that you can get such a product. But the difference is that now when you come to food, is we are talking about what you'll be consuming, what you'll be cooking, and what you'll be producing in the factory so that then you can eat it as food. I think that's what I would want to differentiate it from. That GMOs is not that GMOs are all foods. No. GMOs could be any organism that is modified for the particular purpose for which the user wants to get advantage of from that organism. Because an organism can be a factory. It's actually like a factory. It produces different types of compounds, all for them, some of them for its own purpose, some of them as people we have gotten use of, and we have used that science now to produce food for our advantage.
Okay. So, Professor Odwar, is this essentially tinkering with the genetic makeup of an organism?
Well, thank you, and again, thank you for the invitation. I think tinkering is a strong word in this regard, but I will accept it for purposes of the discussion. Personally, I feel it's not that scientists do this for fun. Anytime there is that tinkering, if I may use your word, is because there is a reason for it. Like Prof. Miano has already said, sometimes we do these things because of the challenges that we have. For instance, now we are going through drought. If there was the quickest way to get a genetically modified, say, maize, then we would go for the drought tolerance for now because of the drought. And what would that mean? It would mean that we first of all look at where is the origin of these these genes. Ordinarily people think that it's just about us sitting in the lab and synthesizing chemicals and transferring them into the next genome. That is not what happens. Most and all scientists, really, the thing that we do is that we start from the point of saying, okay, we have drought, for instance, now. What do we do? Then the quickest thing to say is that, is there any other maize in the platform or in the country that can grow in a droughty environment? If the answer is yes, then we don't need to go that direction because already we have a solution. The next thing would be, okay, is there irrigation that is happening that drought can be compromised? If at that particular point it's not happening, then you say, check, go to the next. The next thing is like, do we have other crops that can survive the drought? Then you realize, yes, even right now you go to Northeast and you will get plants, cactus, sisals that are growing in the drought environment. Then we ask ourselves, are people eating those cactus and sisal? Because if they can, we don't need to tinker again. We just let them eat their sisal because maize is not existing. But because we are very rigid in what we eat and how we eat it, and because of its preference, and it's because of socialization, we then go and say, all right, ask the question, what is in this sisal that is making it really drought tolerant? Okay, then when it gets to the point that probably it has a root deep, you know, the roots are deeper, or probably the leaves are succulent and shiny, meaning the heat reflects and gets back, little is absorbed. Those are the only two traits that we are interested in. So we say, all right, the next thing, let's sequence to get to know then, in the genome of this sisal, where is this section of the gene that is responsible for the root elongation? Then that is the only gene that you pick. Naturally, you cannot take sisal and pollinate with, you know, maize to get a polysisal or maize sisal thing. That doesn't happen. But luckily, and this is what I keep telling the public, luckily, genetically, we only have 4 letters that repeat themselves in different sequences and in different amounts. So at that point alone, you are able to identify that section and meticulously, using natural methods, transfer that into maize. At that point, that maize will have longer roots and probably shiny leaves that are reflecting back the heat. And this I'm just saying hypothetically to break it down for people to understand. At that point, that maize is called genetically modified. How can that get bad? The roots are deeper, the leaves are shiny, but the kernels are expected to still remain the same. And that is why it takes 15 good years to really get to a single genetically modified food, only for the same reason that it must be safe for consumption. And beyond that, it's also regulated.
Okay, and I'll get into the safety because Raila Odinga's statement on Sunday had said, okay, statement stated that there is no study that has conclusively proven that GMOs are safe for human consumption. But we'll get into that. I'll put a pin in that. But Professor Mula, if I understood Professor Odwor correctly, he said when I used the term tinkering, he took issue with it because he sought to explain that it's an attempt to try and solve a problem, right? So why not, if it takes 15 years to develop or to synthesize, the scientific language eludes me, a GMO food, are scientists playing God? What sort of natural evolution, given, okay, so it's getting drier, don't these crops just naturally adapt to the conditions? Professor Mula?
If you go to the Bible tells you that you are made in the image of God. And so man has always tried to show that he or she is in the image of God. So that is natural. And many people basically aspire to that godliness. I think it is in us and it's religious. So if you can perform a miracle, and this is one way in which a scientist tries to show that he's in that image, he can perform a miracle. The religious people do that. People like drama, okay? And that is basically what the scientists love. However, by doing GMO is not about food security or any of the things we are debating. We are actually getting off the mark. You need to know how American economy is built. In America, the economy has been built around 2 or 3 pillars. The first one is patents, intellectual property. The second one is basically their business model is normally franchising. Mm-hmm. And the third one, of course, is all that is built around technology. Now, the FDA, which regulates patents and intellectual property, is very clear on what can be patented and what cannot be patented. And natural things whether it's a bacteria, whether it's maize, so long as it's natural, you cannot patent it, you cannot protect. That means you will then not be able to be supported by the FDA. You will not file a patent. Now, seed is big business. Whoever controls seed controls agriculture. And America has made very clear they want to be a superpower. And one of the areas to control is agriculture. And the easiest way to control agriculture is through seed. Okay? But how do you patent seed? You cannot patent the natural seed. So you modify it so that it meets the government and regulatory for patent, because then you have protection for these 15 or so years, and you can derive your livelihood from it and make money. That is what it is all about. Now, America has not said they shy away from controlling agriculture. They are, and they are willing to go to war for it. I mean, that is what it is. You can say that is what America is about. Europe is also about, you must control the food of your people, and they will not allow you to import or sell your food there. So it is about power, it's about controlling agriculture, and GMO just happens to be a tool. They came about it before other people knew, and they are in control, and they are going to defend it using whichever means. Now we are being seduced into that court so that we are one of the groups that can, but once you are in, you are married, anything is fair game. So it is about agriculture, who controls your food, who controls seed.
Okay, so that's an interesting statement that you made that took me aback a little bit, that GMOs is not about food security, because that's what we are being told, that this is about food security. We take a break. I'm curious what Professor Miano and Professor Odor have to say on the subject. We'll be back shortly.
I know that you're hiding something from me, Carlos. And you better pray that I don't find out what that is. Because the very minute that I find out that you're lying to me again, I will take everything away from you.
He and Bianca are now engaged.
Well, that is interesting. Wow, it's about time. I'm so happy for them.
I'll finally get to marry the man who I really love the most.
Do you know what I'm holding right now? What is it? I just purchased a gun earlier.
What? What for? Where are you gonna use that?
Forever, my love.
New Sensodyne Repair and Protect with Deep Repair. It's a huge game changer for me. The science is pretty amazing because it really goes deep inside the tooth and repairs tooth sensitivity. It's going to improve the quality of my life in a big way.
Do you know why they call me sugar? It's because I bring the flavor, the heat, the spice, and the vibes on Kenyan radio. When a song plays on my show, it moves from being a hot song to a hit to a classic. When I interview you, you become a household name. And for every brand that advertises on this show, they move from being a brand to the brand. If you want to be seen, felt, and heard, you know where to be. This is the place every Monday to Friday on 96.3 Nation FM. It's the Nation FM Drive with yours truly, Anto, Neo, Soul. So kiss, mwah! Every other frequency, goodbye, and keep it right here, 96.3 Nation FM, where good music lives.
A decade or so ago, Sergio Busquets and Jordi Alba were the young players in the Spain squad. Today, Busquets and Alba are the veterans leading their experienced peers and emerging young stars into the World Cup. It is 2012 meets 2022 as Spain's past present and future come together.
Did you know you can open a family bank account without having to visit a branch? Simply download Pesapap app from Google Play Store or Apple Store to enjoy freedom and convenience. All you need is your ID card, KRA PIN, and camera phone.
Who is a man and what defines a man?
Strong and sacrificing.
Passionate and purposeful.
Industrious and independent.
A leader and a lover.
Ambitious and adventurous.
Provider and protector.
But wait, what of the weak and wounded?
And what beats down and bothers the brothers?
What are the real feelings of the fellas?
Well, whatever season you're in, we welcome you to The Man Cave. What beats a Saturday afternoon with the boys, sharing experiences, networking, socializing, digging into good food, grooving to great music by DJ Jom Falme and Hype God, and learning from inspirational presentations by an eminent panel of men. From wealth to health, retirement, authentic relationships, coping with midlife crisis, or just re-examining your role as a man. Come to this gathering of men, The Man Cave. Saturday, 26th November, 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Summer House, Karen. Grab your tickets at 2,500 shillings from Kenya Buzz.
The Man Cave. Be there.
New Nivea Radiant and Beauty Advanced Care. With 5 oils and 5 vitamins. 48-hour nourishment. Helps reduce appearance of stretch marks in just 2 weeks. New Nivea Radiant and Beauty Advanced Care. For your shade of beautiful.
We know your flavor, and that's how you inspire us to always deliver the best quality meals made fresh with locally sourced ingredients. Galitos, bold African flavor.
Get the Galitos Hot Box and a 500 ml Coke Soda at just 699 Kenya shillings.
The government's announcement to import 10 million bags of GMO maize over the next 6 months has breathed new life into the discourse around genetically modified organisms.
Waachana na maneno ya kutuambia wanatoa mahindi kule ngambo ya GMO.
We ask Kenyans to oppose this move and to totally reject any GMO foods should they ever enter the Kenyan market.
About 11 years ago, Raila Odinga was then Prime Minister and President William Ruto was the Minister in charge of Agriculture. Both leaders seemingly read from different scripts, with Raila vehemently rallying for the adoption of GMOs, while Ruto called for a pragmatic approach towards the subject.
GM foods currently available on the international market have passed risk assessment and are not likely to present risks for human health.
Until we are agreed as a country that we can have GMO, we will not have GMO. Until we develop our own local varieties using our own local expertise.
Now, the story is different. Ruto called for the lifting of the ban on GMOs, while Raila now leads the onslaught against the same.
The question of GMOs remains one of the great public concern and controversy, if not outright rejection.
Politicians are now speaking to matters GMO,
an area that they have no competencies about. But just blanket, you know, if you hear people talking, you actually would think that this GMO has never been happening in this country and it is coming from abroad and it is, boom, very dangerous thing that all of us won't wake up the following day.
The Mwai Kibaki government imposed a ban on GMOs, necessitated by a report in a French journal by biologist Gilles-Éric Seralini that reportedly unearthed the dangers associated with GMO. The report was later retracted, leading to controversy.
So when the paper you relied on is already withdrawn, it doesn't exist. Other countries that also mounted the ban on the basis of that paper actually lifted the ban immediately after the paper was withdrawn because they're like, really, this was just, in the Kenyan language, I would say, hot air.
Odinga maintains that pressure from donors could be pushing the Kenya Kwanza administration to adopt the GMOs.
The older Kenya Kwanza regime will subject Kenyans to unproven and dangerous foods in an attempt to please international interests.
Now, the funding for biotech reduced significantly because the donors are asking you, why would we fund research which you cannot apply because the product of which is actually banned in your country?
The debate has unearthed another issue, vocal politicians rallying to the side of local farmers.
Tuko na mahindi ya kutosha ambayo itatosheleza soko yetu katika taifa letu la Kenya. Tusikuwa na haraka ya kuleta mahindi ili hali wakulima wetu walijitolea.
Local scientists argue that with the current drought crisis, genetically engineered seeds that could withstand drought could be a game changer.
There is nothing wrong with GMO that is approved. All approved GMOs are safe. All we are saying is that every GM product must be independently, case by case, evaluated for the merits that it is bringing.
The government's next course of action will be under the spotlight, even as several players call for consensus over the importation of GMOs. Sydney Chazima, NTV.
I'm just scrolling through some of your questions as well as some of your feedback on Twitter, but before we get into them, there's a statement that was made, and you've made several statements in that report by Sydney Chazima, Professor Odwar. So, Professor Mula, I'm curious what you make of the statement that if the GMO-approved varieties are game changers. So I'll invite you to respond to that. But first, Professor Miano, on the question of GMOs are not about food security. Did I quote you correctly? Did I quote you accurately, Professor Mula?
As I said, we are missing the point.
We are missing the point.
The GMO lift was not, the science is very old. The lifting was political. Okay. So this is a political situation. The previous government, if you remember, they banned GMO. It was also political. So whatever is going to happen about GMO or not has nothing to do with the science. It is a political question, or you can say a political science issue. So by saying it is science or not, we are neither here or there. But as I said, it's about politics, it's about control, it's about power. Who controls your agriculture? If you have seen over the years, one organization that will always strike your eyes or it's Kenya Seed. Kenya Seed is dominant in our life, and all they do is basically produce seed for whatever we do. Every time the government has changed hands, the management, let me say, the board of management of Kenya Seed has changed hands. And the reason is simple. You cannot afford to have Kenya Seed in hostile hands. If they fail, for example, to produce seed this year, next year you'll have no harvest, that government will fall. So you cannot, as a nation, let your seed be in the hands of another body whom you have no control over. It's simple common sense. Okay.
All right. Professor Miano, we've seen some flip-flopping on the question of GMOs in that report by Sydney Chazima. Raila was for it, then now he's against it. Ruto was against it, now he's for it. What does the science say? Sydney Chazima referenced a French, was it a French paper? It sounded French to me. Is there a study, or are the studies different for each variety?
Yeah, thank you, Olive, for the question. What Professor Duor lightly said is that GMO is not, even GMO crops is not a blanket thing. Because what has been done for soybean is not what has been done for maize or what has been done for rice. It is very, very specific for what you want to achieve in a particular crop. So you don't blanket everything and talk about GMOs as safety of GMOs in a general way. You talk specifically about the crop of interest. And what even the Prime Minister himself said that time is that any GM crop that is in the market has been assessed and ascertained for safety. So if you look at, for example, now...
By who? Assessed and ascertained for safety by who?
By scientists, of course, and the people, the regulators. You know what happens is, the international rules and regulations, they define or they explain how the GM crop or a GM organism should be produced and how it should be assessed for safety. The one who is producing makes sure that as you are producing, all safety issues have been checked and confirmed to be safe. But there is a regulator who comes and confirms what the scientist has done. So the regulator, the scientist does all the work with the help of the regulators as they observe all the way from the laboratory to the field up to the market to confirming that whatever is produced is safe. But as the scientist is moving, the regulator is also confirming that what was supposed to be done has been done. So if, for example, we take Kenya, as we produce GMOs, because we have done, we first of all come up with the idea. We say that we have a problem here in this crop. It could be diseases, it could be drought, it could be pests, which we don't have an effective way of being able to manage that problem. And you say that we have a number of technologies, and one of the technologies that we can use, which may give us advantage, is, for example, the genetic engineering technology, which resorts to a genetically modified organism. So the first thing that we do is that according to the Kenyan law, the institutions are the ones which are doing research. You go to what we call the Institutional Biosafety Committee as a scientist or as a group of scientists, explain to them what you want to do, how you want to modify that organism. And this is what happens all over the world. Then the Institutional Biosafety Committee looks at it and confirms that what you want to do is ethical and is safe and is sound as a science. After you've been given the approval by the institution or the scientist through the institution applies to the National Biosafety Authority, for example in Kenya, and this is what is replicated all over the world. Then they look at what you have proposed to do. Where are you sourcing the gene? Is there any history of safe use? Is there any issue that from where you have sourced that gene? And after that, what are the controls that you're going to have to confirm that, or the only thing that you're going to change is that problem that you want to solve? Then after the Institutional Biosafety Committee, the National Biosafety Authority gives you permission to continue with the work. They continue regulating your work from the laboratory to the greenhouse, to the confined field trials, to when you do the national performance trials, up to the point of where it is released for the market, including confirming that the food that you have used has been looked for all other compounds and seen to be the same as any other crop for that particular variety, except for what the trait that you wanted to change. So the issue of now when coming to look for safety, the process that went for rice may not be the one that went for maize, because the gene that was inserted there for rice, maybe it was, for example, to enhance the beta carotene, so that you can have nutritional value. The one that you've got taken through for maize is, for example, for resistance to pesticide, to pests or the insects. The one that you come and look for example, for cassava, you are looking for resistance to viruses. The sources of these genes are different. the process of how those genes behave in the plant, because that's what is controlling the trait, are also different. So when you come now to say about the safety of the GM food, you specifically say that this maize has been assessed for safety and proven to be safe. You come again to cotton, you come again to the other crops, soybeans, whatever else that you are looking for. So that's what we are saying, is that safety of GMO cumulatively is a safety of each and every crop and trait that has been assessed and taken into the market. So by the time I'm bringing the cassava to the market, it has gone through all these processes and ascertained to be safe. And not only for Kenyans, because at the end of the day, somebody else in, let's say in Australia, will be saying that Kenya is producing very good cassava and they want that cassava to be imported, into their country. So the safety is not only for one region, the safety is for over the world. So that when time comes for it to be exported or sold to wherever that needs to be sold, it is actually ascertained as safe. So when you talk about safety, and that's exactly the statement that the former Prime Minister mentioned, and it was explained in the video by Professor Oduor, that when you are looking at safety, you come and ask yourself, so it's not about necessarily the whole of GMOs. What are we bringing? What do you want to deal with? Is this crop safe? Is this, and what has been done? And even before it is brought, the National Biosafety Authority in Kenya must first of all say where this food is coming from this country, has been assessed, and have been found to be safe. And let me also correct here that the ban that was instituted in 2012 was not about GMOs. It was, the ban was explicit, it was about GM food imports. Mm-hmm. So that's why, as scientists, we've been able to continue with research in the country. And we have been researching all those 10 years, and we've been, it is not even, it is political, maybe, as they say, about the lifting of the ban. I'm not a politician, so I may not know about that. Mm-hmm. But it's a process that we've been engaging the government with all the way from 2012.
As researchers, as scientists? As
researchers, as scientists, as stakeholders, we have been engaging the government all the way from 2012 and telling the people who are in the policy arena, look here, the issue of safety is not there, because the paper that was based, as explained by Professor Oduor in the video, the paper that was based for the banning of the GM food imports was actually retracted, and it has been shown, even in the, I've seen this, a good summary in the Nation newspaper, that answers all the questions very correctly. There is no GM food anywhere in the world that has been shown to have safety issues. There could be concerns, because any other technology and science, you know, a concern is, if I look at the way you are dressed and I say I'm concerned, that's a concern. But certainty is another thing, right, because it has never been ascertained that this GM food is actually causing those diseases that you're talking about. And that's the assurance that we have, that we have gone through the processes as a scientist, and we have ascertained safety, not only in what we are doing, but also in what others have done.
All right. So, Professor Oduor, I'll invite you to weigh in at this point, right? So, let's talk about controlling agriculture. Part of the concerns that have been raised by Raila Odinga is that this seed, right? Let's say you said if Malawi likes our cassava, then we export, right? So, if we import this seed, for example, from the US, right? It's patented. What does that mean for our biodiversity? Because that was one of his concerns, that by way of pollination, this seed will impact what is indigenous to Kenya.
Well, thank you. And this is a very interesting aspect of things again. You know, the moment Kenya accepted to be part of the global trade, that we are interested in exporting our goods and services to the global arena, then we also must be fair enough that the participants within that global arena must also actually sell to Kenya. So we sell out there, and the other guys also sell to us. The issue about who owns the technology and who probably controls it, from where I sit, is an issue. Because as a government, you have a responsibility to protect your people, all right, and give them supply and goods at a competitive rate. And therefore, from where I sit, I actually find it a little convenient when people when the GMO debate starts and you hear people saying, who is controlling the seeds? Because where have you been that you are not controlling your own seeds? Do we stop importing vehicles in this country because they are all imported from, say, Japan? Do we make vehicles in this country? Who controls the technology around making vehicles? And why are we not talking about it? It's because we actually have an option of importing from Japan, from EU, from China, and any other place. We look at this technology is good, and we need it, and therefore, where is it cheaper? So the control about who supplies, the supply and demand, is a completely different debate. And by the way, at that particular point, when we are talking about who controls and who doesn't, it means you have first of all accepted it is safe, you just want it, only that you are wondering whether it's at a convenient cost. You get what I mean? So that's a different discussion. And that discussion can go on and on in many things, including the drugs that we import. Do we manufacture drugs? There are Pfizer's, there are the Maxironos, there are the Novartis. Do we own the drugs? We don't. And how have we succeeded in maintaining that? It is because we also say, when you bring, we also allow independence, and there is no monopoly. We will look at. And even right now, we are not saying that we are only importing maize or GMO maize from the US. If there is a cheaper one in Brazil, we go for it. If there is one in South Africa, because they are growing it, we go for it. If there is one in Nigeria, remember Nigeria is also growing GM. We go pick from Nigeria. There's nothing stopping us from picking GM from Ghana. There's nothing stopping us from picking GM from Malawi. Nothing stops us from picking GM from Sudan and Ethiopia. These are African countries. So the discussion right now, only that in Sudan, they are cultivating GM cotton. And that means if we were short of actually textile in this country and we wanted to revamp our textile industry, we would go to the US, we would go to Sudan because they are growing GM cotton. So it is just unfortunate that probably our neighbors that are growing GM are actually not growing maize for this particular point, but it comes from South Africa. That's why it's easier to pick from South Africa if that goes on. So the debate around controls is at another level. Honestly said, when the seeds get to the country, and you know there is a difference between importation of seeds and importation of GM food. Because the seed, even in this country, why don't we actually generate seeds individually? The seeds that, Olive, you are holding, that you are calling special, and you call them that they're indigenous, it is fine. I can tell you, in another 100 years, they will be gone. Because evolution is a natural process. It happens. That's why we are not looking the same as our great-grandfathers. And nobody genetically mutated us or modified us. That is a natural process. All we are saying is that if you have this, and I'm challenging the public, if you have this seed that you really feel it is so dear and it's so good, yet we still have a problem with food security, with your very indigenous seed, please, there is a platform for the seed bank, which I would advise each and every country and every person to submit it to the seed bank so that they are able to control this forever, for eternity. And if there is need, we just bulk it and keep it. Because that is important for us as scientists, because that is a default setting for the pool of genes that would be useful for the future. Let me say this, and these are the basics of life. When we talk about GMO approved are good, or, and that's the position, it's because we must behave as scientists like a wise cat that does not eat a pregnant rat.
What?
That means for sustainability reasons. I don't know why it feels very convenient for people to think that scientists are here to kill everyone. We live here. These countries, we have wives and kids, and our relatives are here. We are not going anywhere. And therefore, we are here to solve a problem. There are instances when a pregnant rat would eat, actually, a wise cat would eat a pregnant, rat, because when she looks around and finds that there are 20 of them pregnant, then you can say, I can enjoy one because there are 19 to go. What am I saying? I am saying that we are so careful as scientists. We want sustainability in food. We want sustainability of lives of Kenyans themselves and many other people who are living in this world, that we must make sure that everything we do in the lab goes through the requisite, excuse me, may I grab this a little bit?
Go ahead.
That goes through the international platforms and regulations that Prof. Miano has already talked about. Look, for instance, and because we don't want to go technical in this platform, because there are a lot of technical things we do in the lab which are not necessary for the public because it just complicates the whole debate. GMO, for instance, you see right now we have a problem with drought. But because somebody would say that, you know, I think maize would give us very nice flowers. Yeah, and therefore we would pick, you know, genes from a rose flower and put it in maize and hope to get some nice flowers that are coming from, you know, maize. You know, that time, that maize will be called genetically modified maize for purposes of getting flowers. Then the question will come, at that particular point, like right now, should we import maize that gives us flowers from the rose? And that is what we are saying, that GMO must be evaluated for the traits that it brings on board. What is it that we need right now? If we had GM maize right now, globally, that is drought tolerant, it will be here. Because we want to take it to Northeastern to grow it, because that's where there's a lot of drought. And that is the reason why we keep saying as scientists, please involve us in the discussion around this GMO. We know it. It is the only thing, and we have been trained through the taxpayers' money, and therefore we owe this country a responsibility in terms of getting to know what comes in here. And even now, let me also say that as much as we are talking about importation of these foods, that GM food will not just pop in, that it's coming from the US and it is here. They have to apply. National Biosafety Authority is waiting for those applications, because you can't just wake up right now and say, I want to import maize from South Africa. And what,
so you're saying there are safeguards? There
are a lot of safeguards around this that sometimes I wonder why are we not very particular. But something very important. Prof Muller said that we need to actually take advantage of the internal, you know, infrastructure that we have in the country. And therefore, if the debate around the seeds come on board, then the government itself, we're negotiating for this technology, just like they negotiate for other very many technologies. We're only talking about GMO. The government is talking about how do we make sure that our vaccines are here and how do we negotiate for that. The government is looking at how do we ensure that even the other things that we import for the country, fertilizers, are negotiated. GMO is just one of them. And therefore, we need at this point in time, when we are negotiating with the sources of these technologies, we can also take advantage of the fact that we have infrastructure within the Simlaw or Kenya Seeds. We have other seed companies. To what extent can they partner in this technology so that they also benefit, and we benefit from the infrastructure that has been created over the years? And
you sort of led me up to the question that I was going to ask Prof. Muller. The question of do we need foreign science? Do we need foreign biotechnology? Because that's the other thing that Raila Odinga raised. He said if we fund our universities, he talked of JQuat, he talked of Egerton no longer being what it was in the past in terms of a leader in the agricultural space. But he said I'm sure, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, Professor Miano, you're doing research in GMO cassava. Yes. JQuat, I'm sure, is doing research in GM. Do we not already have seed that has been modified to be drought resistant? Do we have to import this technology? What do you make of the argument by Professor Richard Odwor that this is about competitiveness? Kenya does not, for instance, manufacture cars or assemble. We assemble cars, but we don't manufacture the parts. And then we still bring in the cars from other countries, Japan, China, name it. What do you make of that argument?
The government has not been funding research. Let's face it. I personally was, for example, awarded a grant 2 years ago. I have the letter. I've never received the money. If I had that money, I would probably have been doing the research. You know, we passed those laws about the 2%, which has never materialized. So that is where our weaknesses are. The government has not put money in that research. Some of those places where those GMOs are being produced, you'll find Kenyans in those organizations. So they know, they have the know-how, and basically, if they are funded to do it, because a scientist does what he does because that's how they derive their livelihood, they will do it. Now, we talk about GMO. The debate is likely, actually, the one that raises a lot of heat is maize. Okay, why is maize so does it raise so much emotion when you talk about GMO? First of all, I myself as a person, if I had the power to change or to have influence agriculture, maize should not be our staple food, because the inputs of maize, if you look at all the inputs of maize and the end result you only eat the seed, economically does not make sense that you put inputs for a whole plant and you are eating the seed, which is 1%. Okay? As our population goes towards 80 million to 100 million, maize, whether it is GMO or non-GMO, will be off the table because it is not sustainable. The countries that have bigger population, whether it's Nigeria, whether it is Singapore, they don't eat maize. They eat grass cereals. The reason you go for grass cereal, whether it is rice, whether it is wheat, here in Ethiopia they have injera, is that if you look at the inputs versus the output, very economical. Maize is not one of those. Now the reason maize is cheaper in America, and that is why they are able to export, they don't grow it for food, they grow it for feed. But the feed is not the maize that we eat, it is the whole stock. So that the maize, the seed, which is like 1 or 2% of the whole crop, is the waste. And the reason they don't feed to the animal, the maize seed, is that it causes flatulence. If you ask anybody in the Rift Valley, that is one of the places where our agriculture is more competitive. They use the maize, both the seed, which we eat, and the stock. So agriculture is more competitive in the Rift Valley because they keep both animals and and humans. So they basically are able to use the whole plant. The Americans do the same. They actually farm the maize for the stock, and so that the maize seed is waste. Now that waste, since every year they plant, sometimes the stores get full and you need to make room for the next crop. They sell to us because they can even give it for free to free the stores. And that is what we need to see. Unfortunately, the way our scientists are trained, and the government has lamented this even of our students, we don't have soft skills. We are only thinking about the science. This is good, this is bad. We are not looking at the economics, the social, the political, which make agriculture, all of it agriculture, viable. Now, if you look at all that, you will find that GM maize, the way it is portrayed to us, is not good for agriculture. Because what makes agriculture, or what would make agriculture for maize, for example, in Kenya viable? There is the seed. And even before they modify it, remember they're talking about genetically modified. It means there is the unmodified seed. So there is no doubt about the quality of the seed. So that unmodified seed is just as good as the modified one. So you can plant the unmodified seed. It will give you the same yield. Okay? However, as I said in my opening statement, the reason you modify the seed is so that you can have a patent, because you are not allowed to patent the unmodified seed. You will not derive your livelihood out of it. Once you put it out, it will be free for everybody to plant because it's not protected. And that is how the science has evolved in the US. If you want your seed to be protected and own it and have patent, you modify. So if you ask the American government, can you give us that seed before it was modified? They have it. And it will give you exactly the same yield if you take care of it like the modified one. Okay? Now, the Europeans were caught off guard when the Americans, these two companies, Monsanto and Syngenta, they are the ones who had developed this technology, and the Europeans had not invested in that science, and they were taken aback. How did they respond? Because they are member of the international community, World Trade Organization, they cannot condemn that seed because they are part of the world community. What did they do? They took a step back and started buying time, okay? So that they could also develop their science and their processes to the level of their American counterparts. And they did, okay? So, and how did they do it? They started saying this GMO is not studied. Remember that a patent is normally about 15 or so years. So every year you take, you are basically reducing the patent time, and then you are also reducing the value of the patent. Since 2012, if you noted, was it 2 years ago? What happened to Syngenta and Monsanto? Two German companies supported by their government and in partnership with a Chinese company, they bought Monsanto and Syngenta. Why did they buy it? Because it is a threat to European agriculture. The same way, so you can say they adopted Syngenta the way the wise men in Egypt wanted to adopt baby Jesus. Not so that they can protect baby Jesus, so that they can kill it. So the Europeans have bought the GMO companies to kill it. It is not good for European agriculture. However, when they bought, they are remnants of that, and they bought it toward the end because the patents were coming to towards the end, and because of all this, they were not making as much money, so they sold it. Now, we as Kenyans, we are not looking at that whole picture. We are only just, in our narrow science, we are just saying GMO, non-GMO. It is political.
All right. I'll give you guys an occasion to respond. But we need to take a break. But tell me what question has been asked that we are looking at when we come back. If you could just show that question. Because I want to cede the floor to the audience. Do we have it? All right. Oh, there it is. Okay. So why don't governments buy maize from counties which have a lot of maize harvests rather than importing the GMO? That is a question sent by Anonymous. They didn't include their name and location. I see here Samuel Morning Olive and the panel. Are there any studies that are preclinical that show the safety of GMO here in Kenya? Do we have another one? Nyaga asks, since GMO involves the use of biotechnology, which is a technology that suffers from preconceived notions, how are you intending to handle the way people look at GMO produce? Okay, yeah. Some, let them talk about the one terminator gene and how it affects the farmers. Okay, so Professor Odur has noted, I'll just write terminator Odur. The excessive need for glyphosate pesticide Roundup in GMO and its effects as we eat the food contaminated by Roundup. Professor Mula, I'll ask you to take that one. Edmond Raburo, we have had incidents with GMOs in the past. I have in mind antiretroviral therapy that ended up causing leukemia. Are we in a hurry to meet a political promise? Okay. Those are the ones I will take for now, lest I lose track of them. We come back after this break with the answers.
Hey, my name is Kevin Miner, and on the 26th of November, I will be attending the Man Cave at Summer House in Karen. It's going to be a man's affair, and expect to see you there. There's going to be lots of great food, entertainment, socializing, networking. There's going to be a panelist that you're going to have an opportunity to listen to and get something from. So get your tickets right now at Kenya Buzz. Remember, November 26th, Summer House, Karen. See you then.
Want to know the biggest story of the week? Do not worry. The Weekly Review has got you covered for in-depth analysis of politics, business, governance, as well as social issues. The Weekly Review covers it all. For well-researched, exclusive and investigative content, read The Weekly Review every Sunday on Nation e-paper and on www.nation.africa, free of charge.
We are living in hard economic times. We have high cost of living. The prices of basic commodities have skyrocketed. Kenyans are barely surviving.
If you think about the currency we use, 1,000 shillings is now 500 shillings. I don't know whether we are headed to a point where for people to understand money, we'll need to print a 5,000 currency note.
On one hand, the citizens want improved and better services. On the other hand, they don't want to pay more taxes, but they also don't want money borrowed.
Centum Real Estate has completed and handed over 500 plus homes within the popular and rapidly expanding prime neighborhood of Ipingo. Our estates offer a unique, secure environment and a wide range of outdoor facilities.
Hello everybody, how you doing? This is your coach and your friend Robert Bruale. Let me tell you something. On the 26th of November from 1 p.m. at the Summer House in Karen, I'm inviting you for the Man Cave. Let's come as men and have these conversations. Sometimes we are leading while bleeding, falling while fainting. What happens when the encourager needs encouragement? Well, please be like a beggar, telling the other beggar where the bread is. Leaving no man behind. Summer House on the 26th of November. By the way, it's in Karen from 1 p.m. 2,500. Come one, come all. KenyaBus.com. Get your tickets from there. Listen to me. Whether you're limping, whether you're crawling, running or walking, we are leaving no man behind. We are soldiers in one big army. See you there. Robert Bruale, your coach and your friend.
We know your flavor, and that's how you inspire us to always deliver the best quality meals made fresh with locally sourced ingredients. Galitos. Bold African flavor.
Get the Galitos Hot Box and a 500 ml Coke soda at just 699 Kenya shillings.
We feel this matter is more than just a joke when we speak about GMOs. It's a serious matter that deserves discussion, deep, sober engagement. It's not on one hand a decision for us to, on one hand, just embrace them wholeheartedly, completely, without any reservation, nor a situation where we want to reject the use or even to address the need that could be for a specific time. It's a matter of discussion, it's a matter of engagement and respectful strategic engagement. For that, we call for a good moment of engagement by government, by the agricultural expert, by food experts, so that we may find the right path. We understand we may need for a momentary relief to go towards embracing the feeding of our people with food that may be, in fact, GMO. But that's not the solution. We need to address the deep-seated issues. As a bridge, yes, but as a long-term solution, we need to address what is it that ails Kenya and what is it that ails us to make us not food sufficient. Let's put our minds together. That's what we need to discuss, so as to find the right path. How and how much of GMO engagement will we go to? How much will we focus on the production? How much will we focus on other areas?
All right, I want us to get into those questions we highlighted right before the break, but Professor Miano, really quickly so that we can cover as much ground as possible. A response to what Professor Mullah said right before the break?
Yeah, thank you. I think there are a few facts that needs to be put across. That, for example, that the modifications that are done on crops are done specifically with a particular trait in mind. You want to gain an advantage. If, for example, it is in maize, and you find like it is supposed to be, you are using a lot of chemicals, and you know, even chemicals, they came to solve the problems that we had in agriculture, for example. Why they want to produce with the seeds that they have, the natural seeds, but they may not be able to produce enough because there are other competing organisms that are also competing for that maize. So if it is for diseases, they have to look for chemicals so that they can control those diseases. If it's for pests, they look for chemicals to control those pests. So on top of maybe saying that there is a trait that they want to patent, but the pure purpose is not for patenting. It is to manage for a particular purpose. So if you look at all of them, all the crops that are in the market, and there are not so many, because we have maize, we have soybeans, we have canola, we have cotton, we have a few others which may be about 7 to 10 which are already commercialized. But if you look at each of them, they have a particular issue they wanted to solve. The question came, so that addresses the issue of patenting, so that then even ourselves, if we have our own problems in Kenya and we would want to solve with a particular technology, we are not limited to it. So we can use the technology for whatever purpose. If you look at the world, the number of crops, especially for cereal crops that are used for commercial purposes and which are majorly consumed, there are mainly three. There is wheat, there is rice, and there is maize itself. You may have other crops which are also of interest because of where the market in which they are being produced, like potatoes and all others. So it depends with the region and the people and what purpose they want to modify the crops for their own purposes, not for the others.
All right.
So
I want to give Professor Dora also an opportunity to respond.
I wanted to address one for glyphosate because it's an important one. Somebody said that glyphosate, all the crops that are grown, they require to be sprayed with glyphosate. That's not true. The only ones, especially what you call herbicide tolerant crops, which have been modified for that, is basically for them to help in reducing the amount of weeding that is done. So the others, if you do not need to have the drought tolerance, the herbicide tolerance, then you don't have to use herbicide as a technology. So it's not necessarily correct that all the crops which are GMOs you have to use glyphosate. No.
All right.
Thank you.
Professor Dor?
Oh, well, let me talk on three things. The first one is patent, the second one is the specificity of scientists, and probably the third one is the government funding. Well, because I think we are just responding to what Prof said.
Yes, then we'll get to the questions.
Into the questions
yes.
which we will handle. I think in terms of the patents, and only to enrich the comments from my good professor, is that patents take 20 years. I personally have a patent with the World Intellectual Property Organization. That's the top-notch organization that controls patents world over, and it is on this GMO stuff where we are patented a promoter that controls the expression of the genes during particular constraints. And number two, that does not mean the patents themselves do not translate to anything. Actually, there are loads of patents that actually are lying there which are not being utilized for anything because they have not translated into something useful. Patents only become live when they have been used productively and they are into something that can now be commercialized. And I agree with him that technologies need to be protected. In terms of the government funding, yes, it is true that the 2% requirement has not been overly implemented. But one thing that we must also probably accept a little bit is that the government, much as it's not really giving a lot of money, but they have tried compared to probably 10, 15 years ago. Even during the ban, and I can admit here that the ban was on importation and consumption. Local science continued. 2012, we had a grant in transgenic sweet potato that is drought tolerant. 2015, I had another grant on advancing the drought tolerant maize, GMO, in the lab. We have in the lab, even Professor Steve Bruno of my department actually has one on Striga. And therefore, the government has been actually funding this kind of research. What we are saying, it can be more, and we have a lot in the labs that need to go to a certain layer. And let me say this so that the public is aware. even locally, we have transgenic, germplasm that have gone through the GMO research. Prof. Miano here is actually leading one on cassava that is just about to be commercialized once it is done with this phase. We will soon see cassava out here develop GMO by him. I have a drought-tolerant maize in the lab here at Kenyatta University. My colleagues have cassava that have reduced level of cyanides that are GMO, funded by the Kenyan government. So we need scientists to really be very much involved in this research. But also to say that we need to appreciate the science holistically. But what my good professor said around the specificity of the scientist, probably locally, that it is for or against, that is not our intention. And world over, really, there is no this one scientist who is a genetic engineer and he is able to understand the economics and socioeconomics, whatever. If they are there, they are very few. That is why developed worlds have platforms where scientists engage. And there we have one that is called Kenya University Biotechnology Consortium, which is a platform that we want to bring all the experts in biotechnology. It's a
which you chair, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, which I chair myself. And therefore, this is a platform that we give different experts from different platforms to come and talk about it. But if you talk about Kenya University Biotechnology Consortium, that is for experts in biotechs. We also need a similar one for experts in economics, experts in social, so that they can sit down and every other person looks at this one big thing in languages or in ways that we can harness the thinking. We have national academies. This is the time we need to have our academies now of science now active, so that we bring different discussion. But allow me to sign off at that point as we
address the questions. All right, so there's so much feedback which has come back. You've seen me busy tapping. We have Jane Ambuko here who says, the GMO science is not the problem. The important question is who is in control of the technology. Does Kenya's regulatory body have capacity to regulate GMOs once the market is open? How will the anti-GMO consumer be protected from unlabeled GMOs? Here we have Umar Ndege who says GMO is okay. Wacheni debate yenye haina solution. All right, here we have Evans Owiti who says distorting originality of content creates complexity which may not augur well with our body cells and animal cells, resulting in abnormalities at birth or growth or cancerous. So this is that safety concern. Let's see, who is this? This is MOG, Ben K. and Jeru. He says, our biggest problem with GMO is not safety, but control of seeds, the way they control vaccines. This will be ultimate colonization and slavery once food growing is taken over completely through seeds. Let's take a look at two more, then get to the questions. Although you did take note of the questions about do we have the capacity to regulate. All right, then tell the prof, this looks like it's you, Prof. Mullah. Let me see. Yeah, it's you. This one is for you. This is Moha. He says, tell the prof the milk he drank this morning was genetically modified, so will be his lunch. So that question of are we already consuming GMOs without knowing it? All right, we have Kinywa Mbugwa who says, spot on. And that is, I believe, also in response to what, yes, this is in response to you, Professor Mullah. He agrees with you. He says, spot on. It's all about money. Bring seeds, then agrochemicals, and then when we are all sick, big pharma comes with pills and chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and the cycle goes on and on. It's better to break off early. So these are the views of Kenyans out there. Just a sampling, because there's so many. I'll look at more. But let's take a look at those questions. Right before the break, if we can put them up on the screen for my guests. All right. Okay, so we are working on putting them up. But there was a question, oh, there we go. Why don't government buy maize from counties which have a lot of maize harvest rather than importing the GMO? Do you want to take that one, Professor Miana?
Yeah, I can.
Mm-hmm.
So,
briefly?
Yes, I think there is no problem. And we are not saying that from my position, and I think that's the position of the government, it's not the issue, although I'm not talking on behalf of the government, it's not the issue of where the food is coming from. If it can be sourced from within, why not? It should be taken to the people who are hungry, especially where there is drought and they don't have anything to eat. So, and I think the point is that if there is food, let it be distributed equally for every Kenyan so that he can be able to get the food. So I have no issue with that. And because that's, I don't think that's a debate about the GMOs. It's not about whether the food should be bought or not, or whether it should be distributed or not, or the GMO is coming to replace those foods. So, thank you.
All right, next question, please. All right, Samuel, morning Olive and the panel. Are there any studies that are preclinical that shows the safety of GMO here in Kenya, Professor Dwar?
Well, it's interesting. This is one very conventional question that pops up every time. And there is confusion around clinical trials and toxicological analysis for the foods. Any person who still talks about clinical trials for food is actually missing the point. They should restrict themselves to toxicological analysis, because food does not go through the preclinical. When you talk about the clinical research, then you are going medicine. And that is, those are two different worlds. So how is safety of GM products actually subjected to toxicological analysis? The 15 years that I talked about in terms of generating transgenics, one of the things that you do, apart from excuse me, apart from just the whole transfer of gene, and it looks simplistic that we are just picking genes and then we put them in the genome and then boom, we have already GM. It doesn't work like that. Actually, many a times the genes that we transfer are bought. The kind of product, when you see one transgenic, just like in drug discovery, you celebrate, because picking that gene is also a process. And after that, getting it into the lab to get to a single organism that you can say this is a single transgenic also takes a while. But once that is done, now is when there's a lot of processes happening. Is it toxic? So there is toxicological analysis that you do in the lab in terms of the toxicological tests. We actually talk about tests, because what does this gene that you put in impact? How does it impact on the test? How does it, is it different from the conventional, counterpart? How does it create allergenicity? All these processes are real. And if there is real need around clinical, and which they are confusing with the safety concerns, if it is clinical, we accept, we come in and do that if they want it locally. But globally, this is the process that they go through, toxicological, not clinical. And when we talk about clinical and they want it, and this country, Kenya, actually is talking about clinical trials, GM food is not a medicine. This is a food. It doesn't require conventionally. There is not even a framework that requires it to go through the clinical. Okay. If it gets to that point, then we call it a drug, and it goes through the process. So we will need to change a few things. But if it is just for fun, for purposes of subjecting now the foods into clinical trials, and then we go, so what will we call it at the end of it? It's what face? Which face will we take a GMO food? And at that particular point, is it food or is medicine? All right. So let's stick to toxicological analysis, and that we will accept from our end that we can subject the GMO to. But it's not necessarily for fun. It is because there are queries that we need to address, but not clinical.
All right. If we can take a look at the next question, please. Professor Mullah, you'll take this one. All right, there we go. Nyaga, he says, since GMO involves the use of biotechnology, which is a technology that suffers from preconceived notions, how are you intending to handle the way people look at GMO produce?
It has to be political, as I said. The only way to handle such a situation, because it is neither here or there, it is political, and so you need to get our parliamentarians or politicians involved. They have the facts, and then that way, basically, they can be able to tackle. A scientist will not have capacity to do that, and even if he did, he does not have the resources to reach the whole of this country.
All right. Okay, next question, please. All right, let's see. This is Sam. So, Professor Odor, you had wanted to take this one.
Oh, well, Terminator.
Yes.
Do you know what they say about this Terminator? That these GM seeds, when you plant them, they don't germinate in the next cycle, because they have put Terminator to terminate that life cycle. This was an earlier research. There was a lot of research around Terminator gene. And the terminator gene was actually triggered, that research was triggered as a result of the concerns that were then of the gene flow. So scientists were saying, if indeed you feel that we want to stop this gene in this cycle, why can't we put a terminator gene so that it dies, it doesn't grow in the next cycle? Then, of course, it looked very realistic and all that. The only challenge was that, and this is why we want actually the public to sometimes congratulate researchers. Because at that point, the very, very researchers said, this is a good technology, it can stop the gene flow because it kills, it stops it in one cycle, which is very good. But if it it flows to the next plant and it also terminates that, then that might be immediate termination of the biodiversity and genetic whatever. And it was stopped. Actually, there is a UN moratorium not to use that terminator gene anywhere world over. And therefore, I'm asking the public who still advance this terminator, it doesn't exist. Anytime I hear somebody talking about terminator gene, I know they have no clue what they are saying. All we are saying, they have no clue. Please don't bring terminator discussions in a GMO debate. It doesn't exist. And we, as scientists, will be the first one to pick it. And that is those are some of the things that NBA does, the regulator. They look at what is coming, including the GM that we are talking about, the 10 million bags that are coming. I can tell you, right now, NBA is prepared. Seriously, and I'm not talking for them because I don't take brief for them, but I can tell you it is their responsibility to check. And as scientists, we will be asking, okay, what is the brief? And they will brief us. This is the kind of germplasm that is coming, and that is good for this country. Terminator gene, for those people who still talk about it, it doesn't exist. A GM seed still germinates in the next cycle. The only problem with harvesting your seeds and planting it again is the same problem, is because of the reduced yield. Even hybrids, and let me make this very clear. Those who are planting hybrids, you don't plant the same seeds from the hybrid because of the reduced vigor. A hybrid vigor. You must buy the hybrid seeds every season. That's why Kenya Seeds is existing, to keep producing for you seeds every single year. So the discussion about terminator gene, it doesn't exist in any GM world over. But let me say this, because I have better background training around the cancer research as well. Let me tell you, much as right now we talk negatively about the terminator gene, this is one of the genes that has a lot of potential in solving cancer problems. Because one of the problems with cancer is uncontrolled cell division. And therefore, if you are able to do a therapy in such a way that you can target cancer cells, such that they cannot actually individually, cell divide in the next subsequent, then we are dealing with cancer. So the research, as we talk, scientists look at these things differently. Terminator might not be appropriate is not appropriate for the food, GM food, but in research for cancer, it is one of the areas that is attracting very interesting discussions right now. Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at the next question, please. All right, there we have the question. I think you addressed this, though, Professor Miano, the excessive need of glyphosate pesticide, which is Roundup in GMO, and its effects as we eat the food contaminated with the Roundup. Was this the last of the few questions we took?
Olive, can I say something around this?
Yes,
just for clarity. Prof. Miano talked about glyphosate. It is because it was a technology that was important for the developed world because of the sizes of their farms. I can tell you in Kenya, for instance, there might not be any single farmer who can qualify to be called a large-scale farmer. Because we are talking about 1 million acres of maize. So the reason why this technology has actually, the glyphosate technology has existed, it is because if you have 1 million acres of maize, you will line up almost half of the country to start weeding a 1 million acre. So how did this technology grow? You make maize, glyphosate, tolerant to that herbicide, so that once you have planted 1 million acre of maize, instead of taking half of the country to go weed for you this particular, because weeding is also a seasonal thing. It must happen within a week or two. Beyond that, it now starts impacting on the yields. So you need masses of people to come and do this. Therefore, this technology is where you you spray the Roundup, the herbicides, so that it kills all the other weeds that did not pick the gene, but your maize remains. So that's another way of weeding. Now, in Kenya, for instance, where we have a 1/4 acre farm, why would you want to go buy a chemical, herbicide, to spray within 1/8? So it is a technology that works for them. It doesn't work for us. And actually, I think these are the cases where we are saying the government now needs to say, when you have a quarter of an acre, why are you buying Roundup, you know, the herbicide? It's not necessary. So yes, that technology is working for the West, but it doesn't work for us. And those are the kind of lenses that we need to talk to scientists in Kenya to explain. Now we have this. How does it work for us? And that is a better discussion to engage in. All right.
Professor Mula, you want to add something to that? Go ahead.
Agriculture is a sector, and it has a value chain. So we are talking about seed, and that, at least, science has done very well. So there is a lot of good seed that can basically solve a lot of those problems. However, the crop, after the science, you also have what we call crop protection. So you have crop science and crop protection. And that is where there is a huge economy. The crop protection sector is much bigger than seed. That's where you have the fertilizer, you have the irrigation, you have the pesticides. So the pesticides used to be chemical. And most of Europe, basically, if you look at the big chemical companies in Europe, they were spraying chemicals, and that has been part of their European agriculture. So when the environment issues came about, that is also part of the reason these GMO and all things came about, that instead of spraying, can you make this plant protect itself? Now, how do you protect yourself from a disease? There are two ways. You can treat, or you can get vaccinated. Now, one of the interesting things about GMO was actually one of the very first attempts to vaccinate plants, so that instead of this traditional chemical treatment, you have the plant vaccinated. Now, and there is a lot of debate about that, and we have seen that with COVID. Do we treat people with COVID, or do we vaccinate them? You know, our hospital system almost collapsed during COVID. People stopped going to hospital, which basically tells you that vaccination, though it's a very great idea, which we advocate, but as an economy, it is bad business, at least for the hospitals. Hospitals are, okay, we talk about them as health institutions. They are actually institutions for the sick. But if you cannot promote it like that, so you say this is a health institution when you know very well you are treating the sick. Plants are the same. Do you vaccinate the plant, which is, do you put the herbicide inside the plant? That is what the Americans have done, and they made a lot of headway. And then you develop a whole sector of agriculture basically based on. The Europeans said, no, we let the plants, those ones that are sick, we spray. And if you look at the pesticides in Europe, they have moved from chemical to biopesticide. And during the ban, one of the sectors that has really grown in this country, which was not there before 2012, is the biopesticide sector. At least we have, I think, 4 biopesticide companies which are now really big, which were not there, because previously we used to spray our plants and chemical.
Okay.
And that is a sector that should be, what do you call it, allowed to grow, because crop science, which is the seed and whatever, should be supported by the crop protection, irrigation systems, because it is also an economy, so that holistically we grow our agriculture.
Okay. All right. So it's clearly, first of all, I have academics, so they're used to delivering lectures, and then they are not used, they look at things from all angles. But I want to appreciate the insight you've brought to the conversation this morning. I just want to highlight some more of the feedback that has come in before you make way for Winnie Lubembe and your world. Otieno Alan says it's all geopolitics. And then Kennedy Odongo asks, why is the rush about GMOs? Opaqueness, you talked about hot air, he has introduced opaqueness. We'll outshine the truth one day, Kenyans. Let's watch. And then here, oh, seems I've lost this one, or do I scroll up? I appear to have lost this one. We have here Jane, who had raised, but I think you addressed these questions. She talked about, does Kenya's regulatory body have the capacity to regulate? You answered that. All right, here we have Evans, who talked about animals' abnormalities and cancerous growths. I think you also addressed that, so I will close this tab. Here we have Kirui Kips, who says, I will eat GMO maize. It cannot be Africa, where ours is just to reject anything for the sake. Kwani scientists kazi yao ni nini? What of these tomatoes wakulima wanapiga dawa na kukimbiza sokoni kabla ya muda kuisha? Heri GMO. Then finally, Kimaru Nahashan on the other side, he says, let's appreciate science and technology. He says GMO is good. Allow me to wind up that conversation here. I know, I'm told there's so many questions which came in, which unfortunately we're not able to go through, but we will give you another opportunity, if you're amenable, to come back to studio and shed light on the question of GMOs. We are seeking to demystify, especially GM foods, right? Is it safe? Just in 10 seconds, Professor Dor, is GM, this maize that is being imported, is it safe to eat?
When NBA will approve it to be imported, it will be safe. Okay.
It is safe as long as it has been assessed for safety, and National Biosafety Authority gives the go-ahead. Very safe.
Professor Mula?
It's very bad for Kenyan agriculture.
All right. I'll leave it at that. Winnie Lubembe coming up with Your World. Next, time for myself to sign off. Olive Burrows. We've had Professor Francis Mula from the Department of Biochemistry, University of Nairobi. We've had Professor Richard Odur from the Department of Biochemistry, Microbiology and Biotechnology, Kenyatta University. And we have a plant virologist. Virologist?
Yes,
correct.
From the Department of Plant Science and Crop Protection.
All right, University of Nairobi.
Yes.
All right, this is Professor Douglas Miano. Thank you very much. Profs, have yourself a good morning.
Thank you.
My skin is my identity, my strength. It's unique and deserves care made specially for me. New Nivea Radiant and Beauty Advanced Care with 5 oils and 5 vitamins. 48-hour nourishment. Helps reduce appearance of stretch marks in just 2 weeks. New Nivea Radiant and Beauty Advanced Care for your shade of beautiful.
New Sensodyne Repair and Protect with Deep Repair. It's a huge game changer for me. The science is pretty amazing because it really goes deep inside the tooth and repairs tooth sensitivity. I am a happy patient. I will be able to go back to the things that I enjoy eating the most. The science is there. It's going to improve the quality of my life in a big way. The new Sensodyne Repair and Protect with Deep Repair.